Brother is the third episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about this episode in a bit of detail. This isn't one of my favourite episodes, but there is nothing wrong with it. I just didn't necessarily find it to be one of the funniest, but I do think that if you can relate to either Raymond or Robert, it could actually be quite a meaningful episode. And even if you can't relate, it's still pretty enjoyable. It starts off with Debra and Ray playing a console game. Ray tries to get a little bit flirty, mostly because he's losing the game. But then Marie comes over. And she has a face like thunder. She is not happy at all. And we find out that it's actually the second anniversary of Robert's divorce. He's moping around the house. Nothing Marie and Frank is saying is getting through to him. And she comes over to hopefully get Ray to go over and talk to him. And I think it was Ray initially suggested that Debra goes over. And Debra says that wouldn't look good. It would look like she was being asked to go over. And Marie said something that I think was not very nice. And Marie often says things that are not great to Debra. But when she said, and I quote, "she's not family," that would have hurt. It didn't seem to hurt Debra. But I found that was maybe a step too far in negatively treating Debra. Usually her criticisms are just because she knows the way to do things in her mind, and Debra doesn't do them that way. But by outright saying Debra isn't family, that's not great. Ultimately, Ray does go over, and we have this really awkward exchange. Awkward, it's meant to be awkward. It's not that it's awkward unnecessarily. The exchange between them is meant to be awkward. Neither of them really knows what to say, but they end up going to see a movie, and then the scene after is an immediate shift, and I think it's handled really well. The sudden change in their behaviour is so effective, and I really like this because it helps to show that if you just take that initial plunge and try and reach out to somebody, you could actually end up having a great time. And they do. They come home, they're laughing, they're talking about the film, they're being noisy and wake Debra up, but they're having a really great time and having a nice conversation. And it's strange in a way because it's kind of like they're talking as if Robert doesn't just live across the street. And I think that that's really telling. I think that that was intentional because it helps to highlight that even though he does live just across the street, they don't really bond often like this. And this is actually kind of a rare occasion, and I think it's very well done and certainly very telling. And I feel like the way they treat each other as brothers definitely helps to suggest that maybe they don't spend as much time together as they should or even as they would like. Unfortunately, the mood is ruined when Ray kind of accidentally reveals that it was Frank and Marie's idea that Ray took Robert out for the evening. And Robert is hurt because he feels like Ray only spent time with him because his parents said so, rather than because he wanted to. But things are very up and down after that. Ray goes over to apologise, and I feel like the apology might have sunk in had Marie and Frank not come downstairs and come into the kitchen at that moment. But actually the bonding between the brothers does continue as they start to laugh about things at their parents' expense. It's a little bit awkward, but I do feel like it feels like a quite realistic scenario and a way to help cushion the blow that Robert was feeling. And it's definitely an unpredictable roller coaster of an episode. Not in a bad way, because Robert then goes over to watch a ball game with Ray. He's wanting to take Ray fishing at the weekend. Ray doesn't really want to do that because he's worried that Robert will want to talk. And when they're watching the ball game, that becomes very clear that Robert does want to talk and he does try to talk. But Ray then opens up and Robert realises it was best to keep that door shut. I don't know if that's a great message or not. I can't make up my mind about it. On the one hand, talking is really important, particularly with family members, but at the same time, maybe there are things you don't want to talk about certain family members with. So I don't really know what the message there is that we're trying to receive from this. And if anybody has any concrete thoughts on that, please feel free to let me know, but I can't make up my mind. Are they trying to say it's better to share? Are they trying to say that actually sometimes you shouldn't share everything because you might not want to hear what the other person has to say? Or indeed, are they saying it's a very confusing situation and that sharing can be good, but it can be awkward? And maybe it's not a final message. Maybe they are trying to say that actually it's uncertain whether sharing is always good or not. So it's definitely unclear, but maybe that's the point. At the very end of the episode, Debra does remark to Ray that Maria's kind of hurt that her boys were making fun of her, and then Ray says, it's just something that the brothers did. And he says, oh no, and then Ali and Michael and Geoffrey all copy him by saying, "Oh no." And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time Michael and Geoffrey speak. I definitely could be misremembering that, but it definitely took me by surprise. So if it's not the first time, it's definitely one of the earliest times, which I thought was pretty lovely. So it's not a bad episode. It definitely raises some interesting points, and I think can start some discussions. And as I said, if you can relate to Robert and Ray as they behave in this episode, maybe you have a similar situation with your sibling, I think it can be quite thought-provoking in that regard as well. So, not a bad episode, maybe not a personal favourite, but Brother is still pretty decent.